Good afternoon. This is Friday, November 13th. This video is to assist you with completing activity EM-5, which is on the water and carbon cycle. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background information, and then we'll walk you through the task you need to complete this assignment. So the most recent lessons, we've been talking about the flow of energy. In an ecosystem, again, all organisms need to get energy to maintain organization and run their bodies. And all organisms need matter to grow, repair, and replace things. And so within the structure of the ecosystem, you have to have a steady supply of energy and you have to have a steady supply of matter. Both of these things usually are connected within the food that the organism eats. So energy, as you should see, has a one-way flow. It comes in and it goes out and is no longer usable by living organisms. So remember, it starts with the sun, light energy first. That light energy goes to the producers, the plants. They photosynthesize and convert that light energy into chemical energy, sugars most often. Then those sugars are consumed by the plant and they are consumed by all the consumers who use that for energy. And during those conversions, it's ultimately released as heat. That heat is still available in the universe, but it's no longer available to living organisms. So it goes sunlight, producers who photosynthesize to make sugars, to consumers, converted into heat. Sunlight, producers, consumers, heat. Sunlight, producers, consumers, heat. Sunlight, producers, consumers, heat. One-way flow. We can get away with that as long as the sun keeps providing new light energy every day. And as long as we get new light energy every day, we're in business. Matter, however, does not work that way. Matter works totally different because there is not a new consistent supply of matter coming to Earth. As far as we understand the way that the universe works, the matter that we have here on Earth is all the matter we've ever had, and it's all the matter we're probably going to ever have. We are not aware of any system by which new matter enters the Earth from space at any significant level, and we are not aware of any process by which matter leaves the Earth. So if you've got a fixed amount of matter, it doesn't change, it doesn't increase, it doesn't decrease, you have a fixed amount of matter, what must you do to maintain the availability of that matter? Bingo. You have to recycle, reuse it. Otherwise, you're going to run out. If the matter is used and you can't get the matter back, eventually you run out. It's what we say locked up, and the whole system stops. But instead, we have a way to take that matter and recycle it and put it back into the environment and reuse it. So energy goes one way. Matter is a cycle, goes around and reused. So in the case of matter, again, it typically starts with the plants, not exclusively, but typically starts with the plants. They are the ones that can put their roots down, take nitrates and nutrients out of the soil. They can take water out of the soil. They can take carbon dioxide out of the air. They can gather all the raw elements, all the raw materials from the environment through photosynthesis, convert that into organic matter, sugars typically, which then gets passed on to the consumers. And then when the plants and consumers give off waste products or die, there's another group that then breaks them back down and puts them back into the earth. Those are our detritivores and decomposers. Bacteria, fungi, those types of things. So it goes from the earth to the producers, to the consumers, to the decomposers, back to the earth. Producers, consumers, decomposers, back to the earth. Producers, consumers, decomposers, back to the earth. A complete cycle. That's why I've told you a couple times, nothing about you is unique in terms of your physical structure. These atoms have been used over and over and over again. You're made of the same atoms that the original life forms were made of billions of years ago. So in today's activity, we're going to focus specifically on the carbon cycle and the water cycle, which you've probably covered in elementary school and middle school, but we're going to take this to a higher level and sort of merge these two cycles together and talk a little bit more in detail. So for this, I'm going to begin to share my screen. You are going to need to print out the document for EM-5. And you will need those pages so we can complete the activity. You'll also need some blank paper, preferably a large sheet of blank paper. If you don't have any large sheets of blank paper or roll paper, you may need to tape a few sheets together, but you want a fairly good sized piece of paper. In class, we're using big whiteboards. They're 2 feet by 2 feet. And whiteboards work well because you can easily erase and correct. But I'm guessing the best you probably got at home is some paper, and if you might want to tape 4 sheets together to make something of decent size. So if you need to, pause the video, print out the handout, and gather some blank paper with some different colored pencils or pens. So I'm going to, as I did in class, I'm going to walk you through the first part of the activity for a short discussion, and then we'll get you going on the activity itself. So matter, what's the smallest form of matter that we work with? Hopefully from your previous years in school, you know that is an atom. And you probably learned that atoms are made of subparticles called protons, neutrons, and electrons. We'll get back into some of that when we talk about biochem later in the course. Atoms differ. What makes one atom different from the other? You may recall it's the number of protons. The number of protons determines the atom, and that also determines its position on the periodic table. My understanding is you've worked and seen periodic tables before. There's currently about 118 elements or atoms identified in the periodic table officially. And of those 118, life uses about 25 consistently. And of those 25, there are 5 or 6 that are critical. So in this picture here, what you see on the first page of your handout, this represents 100% of the body weight of the human. Right here, 100% of the body weight of the human. And that breaks down into different elements. And you can see the most common element makes up 65% of the body, 18.5% by the second most common element, 9.5% for the third, 3.2, 1.5, and 1. These are the top 6 elements that make up the body. So down here it says, use the list of elements provided below, predict what you think are the 6 most abundant elements in the human body. Label the diagram to show your prediction. So first, they give you some choices: calcium, hydrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, oxygen, carbon, magnesium, nitrogen, sodium. Those are your options. So we've narrowed the list down. Which ones are the most important? Think about what your body does. Think about what your body takes in. Think about what your body releases. Which of these elements is most critical and makes up the bulk of the body? You can either pause and think for a moment. I will delay for about 10 seconds, but you might want to pause and think for a moment. So this is a hard discussion to have on video. I could tell you in class what people were saying. In class, people said, well, hydrogen, because we use lots of water. Well, if that's true, hydrogen also and water also includes H2O, oxygen. So there was some thought about hydrogen and oxygen might be something that we need a lot of because of water, because a lot of people thought they understood that our body was like 70-some% water. Some people threw out carbon. A few students seem to know the idea that carbon is a major building material for our body. Other folks threw out nitrogen. Their reasoning was because the atmosphere is like 70-some% nitrogen. And my question back was, well, what's that got to do with our body? Some people said calcium because of the bones. And we got through a discussion. And in most classes, we came up with the top 6. We got to carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, calcium, and phosphorus. Those were the big 6. Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and calcium are the most abundant elements in our body. So from there, I then asked him to make a prediction on these circles. Which elements go on each circle? 65%. Is that 65% carbon, 65% hydrogen, 65% oxygen, or 65% of one of the other ones? And so again, a lot of this is just making a prediction or a guess. But again, you might want to pause the video for a moment and on your own paper, sort of predict where you think each of those 6 elements would be in the makeup of the body. So I'm going to pause for a few seconds. You may stop the video and pause longer if you need to. Long story short, we got to a pretty good agreement pretty quickly. And oops, I forgot to bring this slide up, which is an enlargement. So we talked about this, we discussed this, we wrote it in, and we got to a pretty quick agreement. And these were the correct answers. So most people got carbon, hydrogen, oxygen in the top 3. We didn't necessarily always get the correct order, but this is the correct order. 65% of our body is oxygen, 18.5% of our body is carbon, 9.5% is hydrogen, 3.2 is nitrogen, 1.5 is calcium, and 1.0 is phosphorus. Those are the top 6 elements in our bodies. If I could break your body down into a pile of atoms of each kind and then sell you on the chemical market, last I knew we're about $2.48. You and I are chemically worth about $2.48. It's probably gone up a little bit since I last knew. What does that tell us about what we're made of? It's cheap. What makes something cheap? You have lots of it. There's lots of it available. That's the upside. These are elements that are very easy to find in just about any ecosystem. If you're going to live and survive in an ecosystem, you have to have access to all of those elements on a regular basis. It's a good thing we're not made of silicon and gold. Think about it. What would be the problem if we were made of silicon and gold? Very scarce, very difficult to find. We'd have significantly fewer organisms. Plus, there'd be some other issues. In places like Michigan, you probably wouldn't support almost probably nothing. We don't have uranium. As far as I know, we don't have much gold, if any. Michigan would not be able to support living organisms if that was the case. So it's a great thing we're made of common elements that are found throughout the world and in just about every ecosystem, because those are the materials we have to supply in order to survive. So let's go to the next page in the handout. Looks like this. And let's focus on just the top half of the page first. So take a moment and read the paragraph. Right here, we're going to read this paragraph, and then just take a moment to look over this graph. Look at the axes, the title, and what is this graph telling us? So you may pause the video if you wish. I will delay for about 10 seconds. So what does this information and graph tell us? Yes, it tells us the breakdown of the elements and how many of each element are in our body, but which element does it focus on? Oxygen. And what's it let us know about oxygen? Again, it's restating oxygen's the most abundant. And if you look at this graph, I mean, it's pretty darn clear oxygen makes up the vast majority of our body. Well, why do they think oxygen is so critical? It's a major component of water. And water in living organisms, as it says, makes up at least 60% of the human body. If you're talking about plants, it makes up at least 90% of the plant's body. And without oxygen, you can't make water. The other thing we'll get into later is oxygen is absolutely necessary. It's why you breathe in the first place, why you breathe oxygen in. You have to have oxygen to break down your food to produce energy. So between the need to make water and the need to break down our food to produce energy, oxygen is in very high demand. So that was sort of what they focused on first there. So why is water so important? Why do we need water? What's the big deal with water? Yes, to live. Yes, so we don't dehydrate. Those are pretty general answers. We want to be a little bit more specific. And through class discussion, again, it's sort of hard to do this remote. Through the class discussion, we got to some ideas that, well, water is needed to move things around the body. Some students knew that our blood is primarily water. Our blood plasma is 90% water. Most everything that we want to move dissolves in that blood plasma, in that water. So most of our nutrients, most of our gases, most of our waste products, we need the water to transport it through the body. Most people knew that some organisms live in water, like fish, and they need water for their environment. Some people understood that we need water for chemical reactions. All of our chemical reactions require water in our body. Without water, we can't carry out the chemical reactions that we require. And so water for transport, water for carrying out chemical reactions. Some organisms need water to create their environment. Plants need water to fill their vacuoles so they can maintain pressure and stay upright. Plants need water to carry out photosynthesis. Lots of different reasons water exists and why it's one of the most important molecules or compounds. So then we looked at the second part of the second page, and take a moment and read this paragraph and then examine this chart. Look at the different columns, look at the information that is being provided by this chart. Once again, you may pause if you wish. I'm going to just hold about 10 seconds. Sorry, taking a drink in between there. So this one focuses on which of the elements? This focuses on the second most common element, carbon. And what is it about carbon that we are concerned or care about? The key is carbon forms what's called the backbone of the macromolecules. It is the structural molecule that we need to build something called macromolecules. So first of all, here's what we mean by a backbone. This is a sugar. And notice this whole string of carbon running right down the spine of this molecule. That's what we call the backbone. Carbon is a very unique molecule. I'll get more into this when we get into biochem, but carbon is one of very few molecules that can make up to 4 bonds. Everything else makes fewer than 4 bonds. And it's one of the very few elements that loves to bind to itself. Oxygen, you can't get more than 2 or 3 oxygens together. Hydrogen, you can't get more than a couple of them together. Nitrogen, you can't get more than 2 or 3 of them together. Carbon, you can put them together by the hundreds. And so carbon is what allows us to build large molecules, macromolecules, macro large to build the large molecules we need to build our cells, which we need to build our bodies. Without carbon, life would still be on a microscopic level. Without carbon, we would not be any bigger than bacteria. It's carbon that allows us to be these big, massive things called humans. So carbon goes into building these things called macromolecules. And the macromolecules include 4 major categories. As you can see, proteins, nucleic acids, which is DNA and RNA, carbohydrates, which are things like sugars and starches, and lipids, which are fats and oils. Those are the big 4 macromolecules. Not surprising if you look at any food label, first 3 items on a food label typically are your carbohydrates, your fats, and your proteins. Those are the things you need to build your body. Those are the things you need to break down to release energy. This is what a food web has to supply the community. Food webs have to supply you with the macromolecules in order to generate energy and provide the building materials to maintain your body. On the next page, there are 3 questions. based on this information. Whoops, I jumped ahead. Go ahead and answer these 3 questions. Again, you're going to want to, hate to keep saying it, pause the video and take a moment to answer those 3 questions. Please take the time to answer them yourself before coming back. Welcome back. So the first question is, why are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, I'm going to go back to this diagram. Why are these 4 molecules, as it says, making up 96.2%? Oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen. Why are those the important ones? Well, it goes back to this. We need them to make the most common molecules that we need for our bodies. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen are the most common elements because they are the absolute essentials for building macromolecules and for building water. These are the 5 things all organisms need. They need proteins, nucleic acids, carbohydrates, lipids, and water. And if you don't have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, you cannot build those 5 things. Bottom line. And then it goes a little bit further. Which elements do all macromolecules have in common? The pattern's pretty easy to see, I think. Proteins have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Nucleic acids have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Carbohydrates have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. And lipids have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Your environment better supply you with carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, because you cannot build the 4 macromolecules and you cannot make water. In addition, nitrogen is critical to building 2 of the molecules. Without nitrogen, you cannot make proteins, which means you have really no building material. And you cannot make nucleic acids, no DNA, no RNA. One I'll add here, and unfortunately I don't have a way to write on this right this moment, is for proteins, I would add the letter S. S is for sulfur. Sulfur is critical to making proteins. There's an old acronym called CHNOPS, CHNOPS. Again, I wish I could write this on here for you. CHNOPS, CHNOPS. Those are the 6 most common elements to make macromolecules. 5 of them are the same. C for carbon, H for oxygen, H for hydrogen, O for oxygen, N for nitrogen, P for phosphorus, S for sulfur. We don't have calcium listed here because calcium is not a building block for macromolecules. Calcium is necessary for bones, and calcium is necessary for muscle contractions and nerve impulses. It's an important element, ion, but it's not a structural molecule to speak of. So if we ask you what are the 5 most common elements, yes, it's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, calcium, and phosphorus. If we ask you what 6 elements do you need to build macromolecules, what 6 elements do you need to build macromolecules? CHNOPS, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Those are the big 6. Then it asks in the 3rd question, what can't you do if you don't have phosphorus? Well, if you have no phosphorus, you're not making nucleic acids, which means no DNA to store information, which means your cells can't do what? Your cells cannot divide, your cells cannot reproduce, and if your cells cannot reproduce, you cannot grow. No phosphate, no new DNA, no cell division, no cell reproduction, no growth, no repair, no replacement. And down here, if you don't have phosphates, there's a particular type of lipid called a phospholipid. Cannot be made, and if you can't make phospholipids, you cannot build cell membranes. Cell membranes are what define a cell, and if you don't have a cell membrane, you don't have a cell. So no phosphates, no DNA, no RNA, no phospholipids, no cells, no you. No nitrogen, no DNA, no proteins, no cells, no you. No carbon, hydrogen, or oxygen, you get none of the 4. You certainly don't exist. So these things have to be provided. Here's carbon. Talked about carbon being the backbone. There's a backbone, there's a backbone, there's a backbone. This purple dots represent carbon. You can see it forms the internal structure of the molecule. We'll get into more details later with that with biochem. But carbon absolutely essential for building macromolecules. So now we're going to go to the bottom of the page. For the bottom of the page, now mine is on blue paper, it doesn't matter what color paper it's on. You want the part of the handout that says water and carbon cycle cards. So you're going to want these cards. When you have those cards, go ahead and read part 2, the modeling part. Take a moment, read that to yourself. If you need to, pause again. Okay. So one, unfortunately, you don't have a partner you can work with directly. However, if you want to set up a Google Hangout, a Google Meet, a Zoom, a Skype, a FaceTime with another student in biology, and you guys want to work on it together, that is more than okay. And in fact, if you take a picture showing that you work together, I will provide you with 5 extra points on this particular assignment. But you certainly can do it on your own as well. Just want to make sure we caught the one part near the end of this reading. If there's a diamond on the card, what does that mean? Diamond means that is a step within the carbon cycle. If there's a water droplet on the card, that means it's part of the water cycle. And if they're both on the card, that means these are processes that they share. So next step, as it says in there, you're going to take a pair of scissors and you're going to cut out the cards. So you're just going to cut out all the cards and put them in a stack. So you'll have a stack of 12 cards, scrap paper you can throw away. Again, pause the video and go ahead and cut out these cards. Welcome back. Hopefully you got your cards cut out. And now you're going to use those cards to go into the main part of the activity. So in class, again, we did this on a whiteboard. If you by chance have a whiteboard, awesome, that would work great, but please don't go out and try to find one. It can be done on paper, but you just be aware that you're going to have to do some revising as you go along. So on paper, you might want to start out in pencil and add color and so forth later, just in case you have to erase things. So the idea is the cards are in a stack, single stack. They could be in any order, doesn't matter what the order is, and you're going to pull one card at a time. And as you pull each card, you're going to make a drawing. You're going to make a drawing on your card. So I'm going to stop sharing a second and I'm going to go to a whiteboard. All right, so here's my whiteboard. And I'm going to take one of the cards. So I'm just going to randomly pick one of the cards here and give you an idea of what I'm going to do. All right, so I'm going to draw. And it says, so I'll just pick the first card. It says the oxygen atom is stored in water as a liquid and is released in the to the atmosphere as a gas known as water vapor through a process of evaporation. So I'm going to try to illustrate that on my board. So I might draw a body of water and I might label that, and I can't control this super well, but you get the idea. I'm going to call that the pond. I'm going to draw an arrow coming out that maybe shows water, H2O. Again, this is not going to be super smooth. Maybe make it a water droplet. And on here, I'm going to put, let me change the color. I'm going to label this again, this is not easy to do with the trackpad. I'm going to label that evaporation, as it looks like a 3-year-old is writing this. So I'm just illustrating. I'm illustrating on my whiteboard what I'm reading off of the card. Evaporation constantly occurs from oceans, lakes, and rivers. This type of evaporation is responsible for 90% of water vapor found in the atmosphere. And so I might want to put that information next to there. 90% of water vapor. And that's sort of the information that's on that card. So I'm illustrating each card. You're going to do all 12 cards. You will not end up with 12 different pictures. But as you work through, all of these will eventually connect. You ultimately are creating a big picture of the water cycle and a big picture of the carbon cycle and how they interconnect. You might consider using one color for cards that represent water steps and another color for carbon steps. Don't have to do it that way, but that's just one thought. As you work through the first 4 or 5 cards, everything may seem very disconnected. That's okay. Just keep working. As you get through all 12 cards, you're going to find ways to connect all of the information together. You'll have one comprehensive story. I'm going to step away from the camera just for a second. I'm going to grab a board from earlier yesterday to give you an idea. Sorry, this was on the other side of the room. This is, and I'm not saying this is good, bad, or whatever, but this sort of gives you a bigger picture of where you're going. And gives you an idea. It's going to get fairly complex as you go along. So you keep going until you've done all 12 cards. I suggest you might want to put an X through the card as you finish it. And you'll end up with the final product. So let me go back to my slides. Once you've got your drawing done, then you're going to go to this checklist. Maybe. So this is where you use this after you finish the web. After you finish the web. Okay. After you finish the web, you're going to go to this list and you read it across. So does my diagram include liquid turning into vapor through a process called transpiration? Make sure you can find that on your diagram. If you can, bingo, move ahead. Next step, evaporation turning into vapor. Do I have evaporation? Yeah, remember I drew a pond. And so what phase was water in before it evaporated? It was a liquid, so I would write liquid in here. Evaporates into a vapor. Then I keep going. I'm looking for, let me just drop down and get another one. I'm looking for C6H, that's glucose and oxygen, turning into carbon dioxide and water. I'll figure out that that is cell respiration. Oh, wait, I don't have this on my diagram. So if you come across one that's not on your diagram, that means you missed something on one of the cards. You need to go back and add it. So when you can go through each one of these, you can fill it in and you have verified each one of these steps is on your diagram. You highly likely have a complete diagram. You're going to take a photo of your completed your completed cycle drawing. You're going to take a photo of your completed cycle drawing, and you're going to take a photo of this page here. And those are the 2 pages you will upload for EM-5. I think that should make sense. It takes a little bit of thought. It takes a little bit of time. There's a step we're going to do in class that you won't be able to do at home because it's just you, where we're going to get a little bit of peer feedback. But I will talk about that with you on one of our Google Meets coming up. So that should help you get EM-5 done. Thank you for staying tuned in. And enjoy the weekend. As I step away. Sorry. What the heck? There we go. Sorry about that. Anyway, enjoy the weekend. We will be in touch next week.